We're here today with Marea's family to announce a $1 million reward for any information that leads to the apprehension and subsequent conviction of persons or person responsible for Marea's death.
A $1 million reward for information on the unsolved murder of Marea Yann. So why is a cold case from 2003 so important? Well, we have to believe that true justice has no time limit. We have to. And I can promise you this, the story goes far deeper than even the police could imagine. What were your initial impressions of the crime scene?
I remember it vividly, actually. It was, I remember the property up at Healesville on a dirt road, cobblestone from memory, bluestone driveway up to a bluestone house, beautiful country property. No forced entry to the premises at all, and immaculately kept, you know, inside the house, you know, typical of a very house-proud woman. Confronted fairly quickly on the left-hand side as you go into the house with a club lounge with elderly females sitting in the lounge, leaning to her left with significant blunt force trauma about the head and the upper body. Blood spatter in the house, both cast off and contact trace. Her purse, from memory, in near the kitchen area, turned upside down on the floor. A card, potentially a credit card, was missing. I recall the television on, but turned down, and the lights on in the house. The rest of the house, from memory, was just untouched, immaculate. All the windows, doors locked, just that single point of entry, unforced. That's, the impressions have very, very clearly come back.
Tim Day said to me it was a crime of passion. That's what happens. And we just could not even imagine who would want to hurt our mother in any way. Why would anyone want to murder her?
Jeff, give her a kiss.
Mum was the quintessential mum that everybody would have loved to have had as a mum and a nonna. Generosity, love, compassion.
You got a cuddle for me, Bill?
Ticked all the boxes. It sounds a little bit corny, but Mum was one of the good ones.
No, it's you, Jeffrey.
Back in the day, Jeff Yann always had one hand on the video camera.
You're not taking that, I hope.
His mum was his favourite subject.
Well, don't take any photos of me with an old Jeff. The hair, shocking and everything.
Have you got gum boots on? That's what I really want to see. Stay there.
Oh, look, fancy taking photos of me looking like this.
Mum and Dad gave us kids a blessed childhood, love, good food, lots of company. Family was of paramount importance. Having a large extended Italian family came with all the trimmings.
Lots of food.
Lots of food. Lots of food, lots of fussing, you know.
I hope I've given you all a good time.
Too many daiquiris!
That was Mum in a nutshell.
Don't take any more, Jeff.
Why?
Don't waste your film.
I got 3 hours of it.
Yeah, but don't. Leave it for other things.
I've got
Tomorrow,
no.
when we're working around the park.
Oh, get back. Stop attacking me. God damn.
Marea Yann, the bright and bubbly heartbeat of a large extended family. And at the centre of her world, her 3 kids. Jeff,
Got anything to say, Auntie Wayne?
Pauline, and Rhonda.
Rhonda, you're looking gorgeous.
Maria, my mum, was a very, very kind woman. She was a nurse. When Dad died, she moved to Healesville, where she was involved in community work. A great mother, a great grandmother, just a beautiful person.
Maria. Who's Maria?
Me.
I was Donna, wasn't I? You were Donna.
As the kids grew up and moved out, Maria took on a new role. The volunteer manager of the local op shop at Healesville, just outside of Melbourne.
Anyone she met, she found out what they did before they retired. And the next thing they'd be in here doing carpentry and...
She roped everyone in.
Yeah, but they loved it. No one begrudged her the effort that they put in because she just made them feel special.
Jenny, tell me about working at the op shop.
Yeah, I was here for about 3 years and it was very good. It's good, you meet different people, and Maria, she was a little fireball. She was always doing something.
Outside of her family, the op shop was the most important thing in Maria's life.
Good morning, how are you?
But in 2003, her fellow workers noticed that something was not quite right. How was Maria in the last few months?
Oh, she was terrified. She really was terrified.
And how did you know this?
Because she told me. And I mean, her behaviour. She was, every time there was a car pulled up or pulled up out the back, she was just shaking and you know, have a look, see who it is. I mean, that wasn't Maria. It was absolutely awful, just watching someone on the edge of their nervous system every time there's a sound, you know? I mean, it's just horrible to watch.
In her final months, Maria was living in fear. But from who? As in almost every murder case, police took a close look at the family.
Like all of the research will show, it's not rocket science that most homicide victims know their attacker. And so we start generally from the inside out and we look at those closest to Maria and work our way out.
Rhonda, do you remember when Pauline introduced you to James?
I do. I remember the day. I remember the exact day I met James. James seemed to be quite a charming chap. Told me that he was a marine biologist and he'd been living in Melbourne for quite some years.
James Unamadu, originally from Nigeria, moved to Australia in 1976. Within a few years, he met Maria's youngest daughter, Pauline.
It was a pleasure to welcome somebody from Africa, especially because it was our sister introducing us to her boyfriend at the time. And yes, our family was accepting with open arms.
From carving the roast at the Christmas table
Look up, Jane.
to taking Jeff to Nigeria to meet his relatives, James became family.
This is panning. I'm learning how to pan.
Our involvement with cultural diversity was, you know, like a signature in our family.
I'm just getting back at you, James, for all those close-ups.
Mum being of Italian heritage, Dad being of German-Swiss heritage. We often used to laugh that our, you know, at Christmas time our table would represent the United Nations. There'd be somebody from every country, and to us, that was the essence of life.
So, in the beginning, there must have been good times with James and the family.
Absolutely. Look, that was the early 80s. There were not a lot of Africans in Australia at that time, so we actually felt kind of special to be able to be, you know, mixing with all these exotic cultures.
You know, since we had the cash and they need the money.
But on the night Rhonda met James, she found herself alone in his apartment.
James and my sister went off to buy dinner, takeaway, and I was left in the unit, sitting in the lounge, and I could see there was a coffee table in front of me and helped myself to his photo albums. They were full of Anglo-Saxon families giving him dinners and parties, and lots of Paulines in the photos.
You mean women that looked very similar
Yes,
to your
blonde,
sister?
blue-eyed, very similar, very similar.
All right, James, something for the viewers to hear. Some words of wisdom.
Like what the occasion is?
Yes, that'd be great.
No, you caught me unaware.
Come on, there's no editing. Come on.
As the years marched on, James married Pauline, and as a result became very close with her mother, Marea. It sounds like your mum really cared for James.
Absolutely. Well, Mum cared for everybody, but especially the immediate family.
Marea was very much for people that came from another country, and her whole aim seemed to be to help people that couldn't help themselves. That was what Marea was like.
Yeah, right. It's although it's a blue sky, but it's not a perfect day for a barbecue. What we're gonna try and do here is make the most of it, isn't it?
That's right.
Right. So I suppose I got one for you, actually.
That's right.
Have a bit of a focus on Jet.
Now, come on, you guys are doing great.
No, that's enough.
So it's now 2003, and your mum, she has no enemies, no one she's feuding with, no issues, no bad blood,
Absolutely.
no drama.
Yep. And that's why we're in so much shock. Who would kill Mum?
It is without doubt one of the most horrendous crime scenes that I've seen.
What did the ferocity of the attack tell you?
Oh, it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous.
She was sitting in her chair, watching the television. It was done really quick.
She was struck over 20 times. It was a shocking act.
Marea was still sitting in the chair in front of the television as she did, with 20+ blunt force trauma injuries to her head and body, and no defensive wounds at all. None whatsoever.
A gardener discovered the grandmother when he arrived at her Healesville home yesterday morning. She'd been beaten to death with a blunt object.
Now, we might be looking for a piece of wood. We might be looking for an iron bar. There's several things that would cause the injury.
It was a cowardly act for anybody to walk into somebody's house at night while they're sitting down by the fire watching television and beat them to death. And I hope they catch the mongrel.
So early on, you determined, looking at that crime scene, on the basis of everything you had before you, that Marea must have known who came through that door.
Most likely. Most likely.
How long in that investigation before you had a suspect?
So the homicide occurred on the Monday night. We were called on the Tuesday, and I think by the Wednesday night we were interviewing a suspect. So within around 24 hours.
But fair to say, by the end of the investigation, you still only had one suspect?
Yes.
And that was?
And that was James.
This is the man suspected of murdering his mother-in-law, Marea Yann, a grandmother and charity worker found bludgeoned to death 2.5 years ago in her Healesville home.
James Unamadu was charged with murder. The trial began on January 30, 2008 and lasted for 2 weeks. It took the jury just 5 hours to find him not guilty. And the final day, when the news came through, acquittal.
Acquittal, yeah. And to have that judgment acquitted, yeah, look, we collapsed. We all cried. We all just huddled together and just whimpered like, you know. Yeah.
With James Unamadu acquitted, the murder of Marea Yann slipped from the news cycle. Detectives moved on to other cases. Marea's house at Healesville was sold. The case files went deep into Victoria's cold case vault, and that's where they would stay, until now. When a police case turns cold, this is where it goes, into the vault. And there are millions of cases in here, and believe it or not, only for the most serious of crimes. Now, every so often, one of these boxes, a select few, gets pulled off the dusty shelf and into the sunlight. One more time. It's a huge archive space down there, graveyard of cases.
It is. A graveyard of opportunities taken advantage of, opportunities lost, a graveyard of people's memories, of broken dreams for families, and an area that houses, I guess, the pain and suffering of many, many Victorians and Australians.
What you see today is a seasoned cop. But 20 years ago, when Tim Day got the call out to Marea Yann's house, he was a junior detective. He'd been at homicide less than 3 years. Do you have cases that keep you awake at night?
You try not to let them affect you, because if you do, you can't do justice to the victims. But there are always those that come back to you more than others.
Is this case one of those cases?
It is. It is one of those.
The whole case had sort of gone to a very faint pulse until May 2021, when I received a phone call from my sister saying, have a listen to the Neil Mitchell conversation with Tim Day.
Is the one in all the ones you've dealt with that you'd particularly like to see solved?
And there's one particular one from 2003 that I'd like to solve, from Juliet Crescent in Healesville. That's before I retire. That's one I'd like to solve.
Who was the victim?
That's Marea Yann.
Why? Why does that one stay with you?
I think that it's solvable.
It was like music to our ears, and all of a sudden that slight pulse was a defined heartbeat, and it's just become stronger and stronger.
So I'll ask you straight up, can the murder of Marea Yann be solved?
Yes, it can be solved.
And why do you say that?
Because people solve murders. For us, especially with cold cases, people are the key. All right, these are the last of the boxes.
Detective Senior Constable Caitlin Jones is part of Victoria's cold case unit.
Maybe we can look at the crime reports from the time around the area and just see if there's any possible persons of interest we may
She's now
miss.
running the case that Tim Day began in 2003.
See if there's anything that maybe we can look into again.
2003, that's 20 years ago. How old were you and what were you doing then?
I was 16 years old. I was in high school at the time.
Probably didn't even know about this case.
Did not know about it, no.
In 2011, Victoria reformed its double jeopardy law. That means a person can now be tried twice for the same crime if there is compelling new evidence. The original case, by the end of their investigation, they had one suspect. Will your case be any different?
Could be. We're open to everything. And that's why it's important that we look at this from the perspective we're looking at it now, which is this is an unsolved murder and we're open to everything.
Is that original suspect from the first case, will he be a suspect in your case?
I'm not answering that.
Why not?
I can't answer that.
Does the change in double jeopardy laws in Victoria potentially help this case?
I won't touch on that.
I feel like you've had specific legal instruction about what you can and can't say. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
All grown by me. There's not any spray on there. I feel this is our chance.
Pulled out a skeleton knife, which had a blade about that long.
Have you ever come across a case before that includes a witch doctor?
No.
She said, "Oh, Janet, he's got this voodoo doll and he's sticking pins in it."
Maria's with me all the time, and that's how I'm coping and have done for the last 20 years.
$1 million reward? That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
What do you hope it will give you?
It's an opportunity for us to put Maria's case back out there and to hope that maybe with the reward that someone may find the strength to come forward and give us the information that we need to solve this case.
Will you get that thing away?
That reward is from the Victorian government to help solve a murder way back in 2003.
Get my hair done.
So how do you feel now, 20 years on, as $1 million reward, the case is reopened?
I feel fantastic. I feel like a different person. I just feel fantastic. I feel this is our chance for everyone to tell their story and not be shouted down, to be able to tell our story. We've been given a second chance. It's just absolutely, we're so lucky. We are so lucky.
Marea Yann grew up in remote Victoria. She married at 17 and had 3 children.
All grown by me. Not any spray on there.
A hobby farm northeast of Melbourne became the family home. After her husband died in 1984, she moved out to Healesville. There she would be brutally murdered in 2003. Throughout your investigation, what was the role of Marea in that family?
It's very, very clear that Marea was a generous, loving, devoted mother and grandmother, and at times played the part of the peacemaker in the family to try and do what she thought was the right thing. And that as the day of her death approached, she had become more and more burdened by that responsibility and had decided to step away from that responsibility for a number of people.
Tell me about the role your mother played in keeping James in the family.
Mum helped James. She helped him financially, emotionally, and I think James relied on her heavily in lots of ways. I think she was a key to his existence.
Her family also say Marea played a key role in her daughter Pauline's marriage to James Unamadu.
Mum was the ever-loving mum, and she acted as a bit of a filter because she realised that the relationship was volatile, but Mum was just never-ending with her, you know, amount of human compassion and care.
So they would fight, then James would go to Marea,
That's
go to
right.
your mum.
That's right.
Patch it back up.
James would appeal to Mum, and in such a way, he did it so well that Mum's heart would just melt every time.
The relationship between James and your sister, turbulent to say the least.
Oh, totally turbulent and dysfunctional. And there was never-ending phone calls from my mother, from my sister, people crying on the phone, this has happened, that's happened. James was continuing to see other women.
It was an interesting navigation through this relationship because James had had 3 children to 3 different women over the time he was married to my sister.
While he was with Pauline.
While he was with Pauline.
3 kids.
3 kids.
3 separate women.
3 separate women, yep.
I told him he was making my life hell. James said to me, "You think this is hell? I'll show you hell."
17 months after her mother was murdered, Pauline went to the police. She was there to make a statement.
A few years ago, James said to me, "If you ever leave me, I'll kill you." But don't worry, I'll make it quick.
And at one stage he said to her, I could kill you, but I would make it quick. And I mean, who talks like that? I mean, who says things like that to their wife?
And his wife at the time,
Pauline.
She used to tell us what he was doing, and it was quite bizarre. And we couldn't do anything about it.
Take this off, that doesn't need to be there at all.
Deanne Green calls Marea Yann her best friend. She's also her sister.
She's on my shoulder every day. She's in the wind, she's in the sunshine, she's in the breezes in the trees. Marea's with me all the time. And that's how I'm coping and have done for the last 20 years.
Deanne says the problems between Pauline and James were of great concern to Marea, but there was little the rest of the family could do about it.
You can't interfere. Jeff did as lot as he could. He tried very hard to soothe things over. But, I don't know, it was just all the time turmoil.
Jeff Yann would later tell police of an incident only months before his mother's death. Marea told him that she had been manhandled by James and she was now concerned for her daughter. What caused your mum to finally turn her back on James?
There was an incident when I received a phone call from Mum and she said, Jeff, please get around to Pauline and James's place. They're fighting and I'm in fear for Pauline's safety. So I rocked up to the house. I saw James standing in the kitchen. And I said, there's nothing I can do about you and Pauline. And then I tapped him 3 or 4 times on the chest, but I said, don't you ever manhandle Mum. You know, and with that, he reached down to his left side and pulled out a skeleton knife, which had a blade about that long. My first reaction was just to hold on to the knife. In shock, obviously. No one had ever pulled a knife on me before. I took 3 steps back, picked up a shovel, but James and Pauline went straight inside and locked the door.
Losing your mum's support, what did that mean for James?
Game over.
It's only now that James loses his #1 supporter and the one person keeping him in the family, Marea. James views this as the ultimate betrayal. In the end, she did decide that James had to go a separate way, didn't she?
Well, she was starting to become frightened because James had threatened to cut Pauline's new partner's throat from ear to ear. And she started to become frightened.
In 2003, Pauline left James and filed for divorce. She also started seeing another man by the name of Dominic.
The same night Mum was in the car with James, Mum said that James got very upset about my relationship with Dominic, and he said, if I found out that we were involved with each other, he would cut Dominic's throat from ear to ear and get pleasure out of it.
In the end, you can only put up with so much, and it became so blatantly dysfunctional that something had to give. And finally it did, and my sister left James in early 2003.
How long have you been a police officer, Tim?
32 years.
Have you ever come across a case before that includes a witch doctor?
No.
It's a strange thing for Australians to try and understand the use of a witch doctor. But in Nigeria, it can be very common. This is a former close friend of James. I think it was better when the light came straight across. She doesn't want her identity to be revealed. So we will call her Martha.
He said the witch doctor can make you either sick, make you die, but he needs a photo of a person to send to the witch doctor. And that's why I was very frightened. He used to call it juju. He said, I'll make juju on you.
In James's homeland, for some, witch doctors are taken seriously. Part medicine man, part priest, part magician. They are a rich part of Nigeria's tribal folklore.
Well, the witch doctor is like, mate, well, he's the go-to guy for any problems outside of conventional medicine. And so it was spells, essentially.
Curses.
Spells. Curses, potions, things you read about. To me, I had a bit of a chuckle about it, but they take it very seriously.
And so did Marea. Her family claimed that James was so upset about her role in the breakdown of his relationship with Pauline that he contacted a witch doctor called Baba. And did Marea tell you about the call she received from the witch doctor?
Yes. She was coming home from Frankston and she was sitting in James's car and he was talking on the phone and he said, here, you talk to the witch doctor. And the witch doctor told her that something was going to happen in 7 days.
Mum said that Baba had called her and threatened that if James and Pauline didn't stay together, then she would come to a bad end.
What happened to her after that phone call?
After the witch doctor phone call, Marea was working for the op shop. Her house was so crowded with clothing and stuff, and she got rid of all that stuff. She cleaned up her house. She said to me, if anything happens to me now, my house is clean. That was what she said. If anything happens to me now, my house is clean. She distinctly said that, and that's always been in my mind, as if she expected it.
She rang me and we were talking on the phone and she said, oh, Janet, he's got this voodoo doll and he's sticking pins in it. I said, that's not very nice.
And it wasn't just family who Marea told about Baba the witch doctor. Janet Bridgart was also a Healesville local and became very close to Marea.
I said, how does that make you feel? She said, I don't like it, because she was spiritual and she had a faith which went beyond Christianity. It involved spiritualism and she believed in spirits and she believed in the continuity of life after death and that people would come from the spirit world and would be there. So to have a voodoo doll from a culture where people really believed in the power of the voodoo doll and sticking pins in it really scared her.
When questioned by the police about the witch doctor, James denied it. A police brief, however, shows that on the night of the alleged threats from Baba, 2 calls were made from James's phone to Nigeria. But during the murder trial, the witch doctor was never mentioned. Also, not heard by the jury, those police statements from Pauline detailing the alleged threats from James. That court case, there was a lot of information that wasn't heard by the jury. Can you explain that?
Again, I'd like to be able to help you with that, but I understand the question, but I just cannot go there.
Is it disappointing from an investigator's perspective in any investigation when certain pieces of evidence that are gathered are not heard by the jury?
It's disappointing from a human perspective, but that is the nature of our judicial process. It is one that protects us all as individuals from the authority and the power of the state. It's something that I believe in, and that is, at the risk of sounding insensitive, that's the game that we play.
Come on, Andrea, please be home.
She said, one day you're going to read that I've been killed.
Dead.
I hope I've given you all a good time.
Too many degrees!
Somebody out there knows something.
James Unamadu, I want to ask you about the confession that you made.
Yeah, my way. I never made any confession.
Are you saying that she's lying?
Beautiful Healesville. As you can see, Nana's put a lot of work into a little garden here. Beautiful house on Christmas.
Don't give her lollies.
Christmas 2002, and Marea Yann had invited her extended family over for lunch.
This is our beautiful Christmas tree.
Her children, her grandchildren, all there for their beloved Nonna. Not to be seen, though, Maria's son-in-law, James.
It was the last Christmas we spent with Mum in Healesville.
Putting on her sexy Christmas hat.
Both her sisters were there, Auntie Dee and Camilla. And just before we sat down to eat our Christmas lunch,
Come on, guys, tell everyone to come and sit down.
we quickly had to prepare 6 extra plates for people around Healesville who weren't having a very good Christmas. And my husband drove my mother down and we delivered them. So look, that's the sort of person she was, always thinking of others, very generous.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to my home for Christmas. I hope I've given you all a good time.
Too many degrees!
Not enough! Not enough!
September 2003, and Marea Yann is terrified, but she's also angry. So she does something that's out of character. She stands up for herself. She lodges this affidavit with the family court. The problem is, the contents only light the fuse. In the affidavit, Maria labels James Unamadu as aggressive and hostile, manipulative and dishonest. She tells police that James assaulted her, about the phone call to the witch doctor, and finally, that James owed her $40,000. So James got a copy of this not long after it was filed, early September. What would this have done to him and his mental state?
Oh, he would have been furious.
He rang me and said that his solicitors called him into the office. When he came into the office, the solicitor told him there was an affidavit from Maria. So he opened the affidavit and found out that Maria said he was controlling, manipulating, violent towards Pauline. And also that he owed $40,000.
That affidavit was lodged on the 3rd of September. This is only weeks before Maria was murdered.
Yes. All he said to me is that in order to make Pauline suffer, he'll kill Maria. That's the only time she will suffer.
And this is not hearsay, something that you heard from somebody else. This is straight from James's mouth.
That's why I was very frightened of him.
At the same time, Maria's co-workers noticed that James was ringing her at the op shop.
We all knew that she'd been in fear for a long time.
And why do you say that?
Because of her son-in-law, James. He would ring the shop, and then one time she spoke at length about the problems that she was having with James, and I think it was to do about money. And in the end of the conversation, she said, "One day you're going to read that I've been killed."
She told me that James rang up and said he was going to kill her.
You know, I said to her, but where is this all going to end? You know, how do you really feel about this? Do you feel safe in your home? And she said, not anymore.
This son-in-law used to come and visit, apparently. This is what she told me. She'd be there on her own in her home at night, and she'd turn around, and the son-in-law's face would be looking at her through the window, and it was dark. And it gave her an incredible fright.
Monday night, I always went to her home.
Every Monday night, Deanne would drop in to visit Marea. But a week before her sister was murdered, Deanne called in to tell her she couldn't make the Monday visits anymore. As she later told the court, Deanne says Marea wasn't alone. James was there.
I went to her home and I knocked on the window and I went in, and they were both very fidgety. I don't know why Marea was and why he was. They were both very fidgety. So James was quite a good dresser. He always looked very nice, but this night it wasn't James. And he had these dark clothes on, very dark clothes, very dark jacket, jumper. And I said to her, Marea, I've come to say that I can't ever come on a Monday night. And the following Monday, she was dead.
Rhonda, the 29th of September, 7:39 p.m. Had a phone call with your mum.
I did, and I remember that night. We had a lovely conversation for about half an hour, and I was the last person to speak to her. And no idea that anything hideous was about to happen.
Monday nights was Mum's chill-out night. Everyone knew it, so she was sitting in her chair, watching the television, not expecting anybody. And dead.
How did you find out that Marea had passed away?
I answered the phone at 8:20 in the morning, and it was my sister Camilla, and she was absolutely beside herself. She said, our sister's dead. Our sister's dead, and the police won't let me go into her. And, naturally, I mean, I nearly thumped a hole in that table, I know that. I couldn't believe it.
How important is phone data in a case such as this?
Oh, huge, huge. In almost every homicide, phone data's significant, and increasingly so.
As with any serious crime, the timeline is everything. Marea Yann was murdered on Monday, the 29th of September. Her sister Deanne says she saw James arguing with Marea here on the Monday before. But James told police the last time he saw Marea was way back here on the 8th of September. But that is a lie. I know this not because of a statement, not because of a witness, but something much, much better. Just 5 days before Marea was murdered, just 5 days, this cell phone tower here at Healesville, and just a short distance from Marea's place, logged a call from James's mobile phone at 10:14 p.m. He says he wasn't in Healesville, but he was.
I would say in this case the phone data puts James's mobile in the Healesville area that evening.
Nicola Doxford was an Army intelligence officer. She's now a data analyst, and her specialty, crunching telephone metadata.
His statement is that he hasn't loaned his phone to anybody else in that period, so it should be in his possession.
Marea's home in Healesville was nearly 80 kilometres away from where James lived in Frankston. There are dozens of mobile phone towers in between. This is what his phone data reveals on the day of Marea's death. 5:52 p.m, a crucial point in this timeline. James Unamadu calls a plumber who he owes money to.
Yep, so at 5:52 p.m, James's mobile calls the plumber for 1 minute and 30 seconds. And at that time, his mobile phone is located in the Frankston area.
Which puts him in the location of his home.
That's right.
Then, for the next 5.5 hours, his phone goes silent. Does the data mean that he had time to get to the scene of the crime and back home?
According to the files that I've read and the time it would take to travel from Frankston to Healesville and come back, that does give enough time to make that trip.
James has no alibi for his whereabouts. He says he was at home alone. But during this time, a phone call to his mobile from a close friend goes unanswered. At the trial, police alleged it was because James was in Healesville about to commit murder.
If you ask me that question, do you think I think he's capable of doing it? Definitely, definitely.
And why do you say that?
Because the way he spoke to me.
So to him, life had a different value.
Correct, yes.
In my mind, it was more than a murder, it was an execution. It was done really quick. A crime of passion, 22 direct head wounds.
Back in 2003, James Unamadu ended up being the only suspect. At the murder trial, the Yann family sat through every painful day. But in the end, James was acquitted. You didn't have a personal feeling at the end of that court case with an acquittal?
Oh, I did, but I'll keep that to myself.
Family says you shed a few tears with them on that day.
And again, that's something that I think I'll keep to myself.
Oh, hello. Are you familiar with Marea Yann?
During our investigation into the murder of Marea Yann,
You wouldn't happen to know this lady, would you?
there was one vital witness we wanted to find.
Come on, Andrea. Please be home.
Her name is Andrea King.
G'day.
Back in the day,
No luck.
she and James were very close.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking for a lady called Andrea King.
What's your name?
Liam, L-I-A-M.
Here to help me is Liam Mendes, a journalist with the Australian newspaper.
Hello, how are you? I'm not from Jehovah's Witness, I can promise you that. And I'm trying to get in touch with an Andrea King.
We even print out close to 100 missing person pamphlets at the places she was last seen, because we wanted to ask her about statements she'd made to the police.
Do I give you my number if you see her?
Yeah.
They detailed a conversation she had with James in the days following Maria's death.
It was only a few days later, James arrived unannounced to my place. James told me that he had killed her. He had done it and that the police had no proof and that he had no intention of going to jail for it. I cut the conversation short and told him that I didn't want to know or get involved. I told him not to come around or contact me. Not long after, I moved address.
How many doors do you reckon you've knocked on so far? We're yet to find Andrea, but she did testify, and this was part of her evidence at Maria's murder trial. So let's go through the evidence that the jury didn't hear. They didn't hear about the knife attack.
They didn't hear about the knife attack.
James and you. They didn't hear about the threats that he made to Pauline, his sister.
No, and there were several over the period of time. You'd think it'd be game over. Like, what else do we need?
And what about Pauline, the former wife of James Unamadu? I've been in contact with her throughout this investigation, phone calls and email, and she's declined to be interviewed. She does not believe James murdered her mother and posed several alternate theories. I put it to you that in the original investigation you had one suspect, and that was James Unamadu, and that in the investigation now with Caitlin, he remains the number one suspect.
Okay, so again, going back to the original investigation, it would not be appropriate for me to talk about that. In terms of Caitlin's review of my investigation and the team's investigation, it is for her to remain objective and keep that open mind in terms of who she suspects
Can I suggest that the reason that both yourself and Caitlin are being so careful is that James Unamadu is still the #1 suspect and you don't want to jeopardise any potential future case?
Yeah, I can't even go there. I appreciate you asking the question, but I just can't even, I can't even respond to that. It's just not appropriate that I do so.
And what of James Unamadu? Maria's family tell us that he has a new girlfriend and lives in her house in a nice street. And if there's anything on his conscience, it doesn't show. James Unamadu, Denham Hitchcock. How are you? I know you were acquitted at that trial and you're entitled to a presumption of innocence, but I want to ask you about the confession that you made.
Yeah, my way. I never made any confession to anyone.
Andrea King, you never made a confession to Andrea King? Are you saying that she's lying? Hey, don't, excuse me, sir. Don't touch him, please. Don't touch him. You're saying that Andrea King is lying about that confession?
Correct. Leave my door.
Just want to talk to you, sir, just for a moment. James, there's a few things I want to run past you. I'd really like to give you the right of reply. So there's James. Of course, we need to give him the right of reply, but he doesn't want to talk to us today. Doesn't want to talk about the threats that he allegedly made and 1,000 other questions I have for him that are not going to be answered today. Justice can't come soon enough for Maria's family and friends. 2 decades on, and they are still praying that one day her killer will finally be caught. When you go surfing, is it to reflect or is it to forget?
Oh, look, it's to debrief, and nature was a really important ingredient in Mum's life and reflected in ours, that hold on to the things that are dear, and nature was a really, really important part of our lives. So it's a real time of reflection and remembering what's important in life.
Somebody out there knows something. Somebody out there hasn't told us the whole truth. There is no crime that's secret crime. Somebody always tells somebody, and somebody knows. And hopefully almost 20 years down the track, somebody's now in a position to come forward and tell us something they haven't before.